I've always believed that solitude has its own healing rhythm. That was the reason I drove nearly 10 hours from Spokane to the deep heart of Montana's Bitterroot National Forest in late September of 2019, right before the first snow touched the high ridges. My mind was a mess back then, a job that felt like it was crushing me, and this constant feeling that the world around me had grown too loud. I wanted silence, just the sound of trees moving in the wind, maybe a crackling fire under the stars. When I reached the forest line, the sunlight was fading into this burnt orange color that melted through the pine branches. The dirt road to the campsite looked half forgotten, overgrown, with the kind of isolation that city people only see in photographs. My GPS had already lost signal 2 hours before, and by the time I parked beside the clearing, I knew I was entirely alone. That realization gave me a strange comfort, like no one could find me here. And for once, that was exactly what I wanted. The place was beautiful in a wild, untouched way. A small stream whispered behind the trees, and the scent of pine resin mixed with damp soil and the faint sweetness of decaying leaves. I pitched my small green tent near a fallen log and collected some dry wood. By the time the fire started, the cold had crept in. I remember sitting there, wrapped in my jacket, feeling almost proud of the orange glow that I'd created against the infinite blackwoods. That first night, the silence was overwhelming. Not peaceful exactly, more like the air itself was holding its breath. I listened to it, trying to find peace in the emptiness, until sometime after midnight when I began to sense something else in that silence. It wasn't sound, but an awareness, like the forest itself had started paying attention to me. Every now and then, the wind would rush through the trees, and I'd see the fire tremble, not from the gusts, but as if it resisted them, as though something was breathing near it. The next morning was perfectly normal. The fire had gone out overnight, and frost had gathered on the grass. I went fishing near the stream, caught nothing, and spent the rest of the day wandering the ridgeline trails. There was no sign of anyone around, no vehicles, no footprints, no campfire remains, nothing. It was absolute isolation. That night, though, the strangeness began to grow. When I built a fire again, it behaved differently. The flames were stronger than they should have been, bright and alive even though I'd barely used any fuel. It made no sense. The wood wasn't dry, and the kindling was half damp. Yet, the fire seemed to burn like it was feeding on something else. I sat near it, warming my hands, and I remember feeling this low vibration under my palms, faint but steady, as if the ground beneath the flames was gently pulsing. At around 10 p.m., I noticed something peculiar. The woods were too still. Usually, forests at night are filled with sounds, insects, frogs, owls. But here, there was absolutely nothing. Just that soundless void again. I looked up at the trees, half expecting to see an animal, but all I saw were shadows. My stomach felt tight, kind of instinctive unease that doesn't come from fear of animals, but from something older, more primal. The fire grew larger as the hours passed, and I realized I hadn't added any wood in nearly 20 minutes. It should have died down long ago, but it didn't. The flames danced tall, twisting like they were reaching for something. Then I smelled something strange, not with smoke, but a metallic, earthy scent, almost like burning soil mixed with old blood. I stepped back from the fire, watching it closely, and for the first time, I felt like it was watching me back. I tried to put it out with water, but it hissed, flared brighter, then returned to normal, still alive, still breathing. My flashlight flickered, then died. The darkness swallowed everything beyond that circle of unnatural light. I stood there alone, my breath showing in the cold air, and I thought about leaving right then. But my vehicle was parked half a mile away, down a trail so dark I could barely see the trees. I told myself it was exhaustion, and the thin mountain air playing tricks on me. I went into my tent. Sleep didn't come easily. The flicker of the fire outside cast long shadows across the tent fabric, twisting like the shapes of people moving. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard soft steps circling around. Once, I thought I saw a silhouette stand still behind the tent wall, not walking, not shifting, just standing. I held my breath for what felt like forever until I finally heard it move away. I lay there frozen until morning light seeped in. When I crawled out, the fire was still burning. I hadn't fed it since last night, yet the flames were steady, almost identical to how I'd left them. The ashes below were black, but the fire above them glowed fiercely. It didn't make sense. My instincts told me to leave immediately, but curiosity pulled me closer. I nudged one of the logs with a stick, and I saw what was underneath. Not wood, but soil, hot and dry, as if the ground itself was burning from beneath. I doused the area with every drop of water I had, but the fire wouldn't go out. Panic replaced reason. I started throwing dirt onto it, my hand shaking, my breath ragged in the thin air. No matter what I did, the flames refused to die. That metallic smell returned, stronger this time, and a low hum vibrated through the air, deep enough to rattle my teeth. I backed away, stumbling toward my car, leaving everything, my tent, my pack, my gear, all of it. When I reached the trail, I looked back once. The fire was still there, glowing through the trees, like an open wound in the forest. It took me nearly 2 hours to reach the ranger station, pale and half delirious. The ranger who met me said no one was allowed to camp in that sector anymore, not since 1974. He told me there had been an old forest fire there decades ago, one that had burned for days underground, even after the surface flames were gone. It had started from a small illegal campfire, a camper who was never found, only his burnt gear near a patch of scorched ground that, according to reports, refused to cool for weeks. I told him where I'd camped. He stared at me like I was joking, then shook his head. That area had been closed off since the 70s. He said even the soil there still gets warm from deep underground, especially in early autumn when the frost traps the heat below. But the part that kept me awake for months after was what he said next, almost as an afterthought. He told me that every few years, hikers report seeing a single, isolated campfire burning deep within the restricted zone, one that no one can ever find when they go back looking for it. I never returned to Montana, but sometimes when I drive through forested roads at night, I catch the faint smell of smoke and metal. And no matter where I am, I always feel that same vibration under my hands, as if somewhere beneath the surface, the earth is still breathing through fire. It was the first week of June 2021 when I went to Olympic National Park. The tourist season hadn't peaked yet, and that's what I liked most. Those quiet, damp trails where the smell of moss and rain clings to everything, and you can hear your own heartbeat if you stand still. I'd been working remotely through the pandemic, my world shrinking into a one-bedroom apartment, and this trip felt like a breath of clean air I desperately needed. I planned a 3-day solo camp along the Bogaccio River Trail, deep inside the forest where the canopy blocks most of the sunlight. The rangers told me that bears were active, but I wasn't worried. I'd done this kind of trip before. I knew the rules. Hang your food, stay aware, and don't wander off trail. The first day was beautiful in that quiet, humbling way that forests can be. Everything felt damp, my pack straps, my hair, even my breath when I exhaled. I hiked about 10 miles in and found a small clearing by the river, a flat patch surrounded by towering pines that looked centuries old. I set up camp, cooked a small meal on my burner, and listened to the river running like a low, constant hum. It was around 7 p.m. when I first noticed the feeling. That slight prickling on the back of your neck when you realize you're not alone. I didn't hear anything at first, but there was a change in the atmosphere. The forest has its own language, a balance of sound that feels natural, and when that balance shifts, you can sense it. The birds had gone quiet. Even the insects seemed still. At the edge of my vision, between the trees, I thought I saw something move, just a shadow, nothing clear. I brushed it off, told myself it was an animal, but the feeling didn't fade. Every time I turned my head, I expected to catch someone's eyes between the branches. That night, as I lay in my tent, the unease grew heavier. The rain had stopped, leaving the forest dripping and silent. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint crunch, like a footstep pressing into wet ground. It wasn't rhythmic, not the sound of a deer or a raccoon. It came once, then nothing, then again, a little closer. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't. It circled slowly, keeping distance, never revealing itself. When morning came, I found faint impressions in the mud around my campsite. They weren't clear footprints, more like the soil had been disturbed in several spots, as if someone had been pacing there, just out of view. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe an animal, maybe my imagination. But deep down, something didn't feel right. I packed early and moved farther upriver, telling myself it would make me feel better to keep moving. The forest grew denser, the sunlight thinner. I walked for hours without seeing a single person. No hikers, no rangers, no one. By late afternoon, I reached a new clearing, smaller, darker, and completely surrounded by trees so thick they looked like a wall. I set up camp again, but the air felt heavier here, colder. That night, the feeling returned, stronger this time, not just unease but awareness, like being watched from multiple angles. The sound of movement came again, a soft drag across wet leaves, deliberate, slow. Then a twig snapped near the riverbank. I froze. Every instinct told me to get up, grab my flashlight, and check. But another part of me, the part that still wanted to believe I was safe, told me to stay quiet. The sound circled the tent. The movement was cautious, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there knew I was listening. It stopped once or twice, then resumed in a different direction. At one point, I heard what I can only describe as breathing, faint, irregular, close enough that I could almost sense the exhale through the fabric of my tent. My heart thudded, so hard that I worried it would give me away. Eventually, the sounds faded, replaced by the constant murmur of the river. I didn't sleep. When the sun finally rose, I stepped out of the tent with my knife in hand. The ground outside was damp with morning mist, and I could see clearer prints this time. Human-like, barefoot, large, with long, uneven strides. They led from the river to my tent, then disappeared into the trees. I wanted to believe they were old, maybe distorted by the rain, but the edges were sharp, recent. I felt my throat tighten. Someone had been here, close enough to touch my tent. I decided to cut the trip short and hike back. But that's when things got worse. Halfway down the trail, I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't hear anyone behind me, but the forest had that same off-balance silence as before. Every few minutes, I'd hear the faint crack of branches, always a few paces behind. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it followed. I began to move faster, my pack digging into my shoulders. The forest was too dense to see far, and that made it worse. Every tree felt like a hiding place, every shadow like a figure frozen mid-step. I tried calling out once, just a single hey, but the sound of my voice felt wrong here, swallowed too quickly by the damp air. No response came back. The trail wound down a steep hill, and that's when I saw it, movement in the corner of my eye, far behind me. I turned and caught a glimpse of something tall, human-shaped, partially hidden by a cluster of pines. It stood perfectly still. The air between us seemed to tighten. Then, slowly, it stepped backward into the trees and vanished. I started running. The sound of my boots slapping against the wet ground echoed unnaturally loud, and somewhere behind me, the crunching followed, faster now, matching my pace. I didn't dare look back again. I ran until I reached the small wooden bridge I'd crossed 2 days earlier, and there, for the first time, I saw signs of other people. Boot tracks, a trail marker, a hint of civilization. The sound stopped there. Everything went silent again. I didn't stop running until I reached the trailhead, where my car was parked. I remember sitting behind the wheel, shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. My hands were muddy, my face streaked with sweat, and the forest behind me looked so still, as if nothing had ever happened there. When I got to the ranger station, I told them someone had been following me on the Bogachil Trail. They sent a small search team to check. Later that night, one of the rangers called me. His voice was calm but heavy. He said they'd found my old campsite, and yes, some tracks around it, but not human ones. He described them as long impressions in the soil, spaced too far apart for a normal stride. The prints led away from the river and vanished near a ridge of broken stones. I've always believed nature has two faces, one that welcomes you with quiet beauty, and another that waits in complete indifference for you to make a mistake. In the fall of 2020, I made one. I went into Elk Valley alone. It was late October, right before the first real snow. The sky had that washed-out gray color that feels like it's holding something back, the kind of weather where the air tastes sharp, and even your breath feels heavy. I'd taken 2 weeks off from work, thinking I'd spend them hiking and photographing wildlife around the San Juan Mountains. I wanted to unplug, to feel that old kind of silence you can't find anywhere else. A local in Silverton told me about Elk Valley, a little-known stretch of forest between two old mining routes, rarely visited, not even listed on some maps. He said it was beautiful, untouched, and quiet. I remember him hesitating before adding that GPS signals don't work there and that even hunters avoid it after dark. I thought it was just small-town superstition. Now I wish I'd listened. I reached the trailhead before noon on a Wednesday. My backpack was heavy but organized. Tent, stove, food, flare, knife, satellite compass. The first few miles were serene. Aspen leaves fluttered down like gold coins, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine resin. The further I went, the quieter it became. Fewer birds, fewer insects, and a kind of stillness that made each step sound like an intrusion. By evening, I found a clearing beside a stream and decided to camp there for the night. The place felt isolated, peaceful in a way that almost made me forget how far I was from anyone else. I built a small fire, cooked some rice and beans, and sat listening to the slow current of the stream. Somewhere in the distance, a lone elk called out, that deep, echoing sound that travels for miles through the trees. It was haunting but strangely calming. I fell asleep easily, but sometime after midnight, I woke up to movement outside. It wasn't the small, careless rustling of an animal. This was heavier, deliberate. Something large moved between the trees, snapping a branch underfoot. I froze inside my tent, barely breathing. The sound circled once, then stopped. For a long time, there was only silence. At dawn, I checked the area. The ground was soft with mud, and I saw what looked like prints near the stream. Not boots, not bear tracks either. They were long and oval, like an animal's paw, but each one had a deep gouge where the claws had dug in. They were spaced far apart, as if the creature had a massive stride. I told myself it had to be a cougar or a wolf, though something about the spacing didn't fit. I packed quickly and decided to move farther up the valley. The air grew colder, the trees denser, and the trail less visible. My compass pointed north, but the forest seemed to twist and repeat itself. After 4 hours of hiking, I realized I'd passed the same broken tree twice. I wasn't on the trail anymore. That's when the unease turned into real fear. I climbed a ridge, hoping to see a landmark or a break in the forest canopy, but all I saw was an endless stretch of pine and shadow. The wind carried faint, distant sounds, branches creaking, maybe an echo of my own footsteps. But beneath it, there was something else. A low, guttural noise, too deep for wind, too steady for nature. It came from somewhere ahead, then stopped abruptly. I decided to head downhill toward what I thought was the stream, but the terrain shifted quickly, and I found myself in a narrow ravine, surrounded by steep rock walls. The light barely reached the ground. That's where I smelled it. A stench so foul it made my stomach twist. It was the smell of rot and something metallic underneath, like blood drying on cold stone. I tried not to panic. I kept moving slowly, scanning every shadow. The silence was complete until a branch snapped somewhere to my right. My head jerked toward the sound, and for the first time, I saw it. Just a glimpse, half hidden behind the trees. It was low to the ground, huge, moving with a kind of unnatural smoothness. Its body looked wrong, too long, too lean, like something built for running in the dark. I caught the gleam of its eyes, pale yellow, unblinking. Then it was gone. My pulse pounded, so hard it made my vision shake. I started running, stumbling over roots and rocks, not caring about direction anymore, just wanting distance. Behind me, the forest exploded in noise, crashing branches, heavy footfalls, and that deep growling breath that followed in rhythm with my own. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out and I fell against a fallen log. Everything went silent again. I waited there for what felt like hours, barely daring to breathe. My hands were shaking, my throat dry. The air around me smelled wrong, not like the clean scent of pine, but like animal musk and decay. When I finally stood up, it was already evening. The forest looked darker than it should have been, shadows moving strangely between the trees. I tried using my compass again, but the needle spun uselessly, twitching in every direction. My phone was dead. The sun dropped behind a ridge, and the forest filled with long, cold blue light. I knew I had to build a fire before full dark, but there was no dry wood. I found a half-sheltered space under a rock overhang, enough to sit and rest. The air felt thick, heavy, like the forest was holding its breath again. Sometime later, a howling began. It wasn't like a wolf. It was deeper, longer, almost like a human voice stretched too far. It started far away, then another answered it closer. The sound echoed through the valley, bouncing off the rocks, impossible to locate. My whole body went numb. I pressed myself against the wall of the overhang, knife in hand, though I knew it would do nothing. The howling stopped. Then came the soft, rhythmic crunch of footsteps in the leaves, slow, deliberate, moving closer. Through the dark, I saw movement again, that same low, elongated shape gliding between the trees. It paused about 30 feet away, head low, eyes glowing faintly. Its outline was wrong, longer than any wolf, shoulders too high, limbs moving like something not built for daylight. It didn't lunge. It didn't growl. It just stood there watching. Then, just as suddenly, it turned and vanished into the dark. I waited until dawn before moving again. My body felt like it had aged years overnight. I found the stream again by luck and followed it for hours until the forest thinned and I saw a trail marker, faded, but real. When I finally stumbled into a ranger's outpost, I could barely speak. The ranger who found me looked startled. He said I was 20 miles off any marked trail, deep inside a restricted wildlife zone. When I told him what I saw, his face changed, not disbelief exactly, but a kind of quiet recognition. He told me about reports, rare but consistent, from lost hikers who spoke of seeing something in Elk Valley, a predator no one could identify. Some said it looked like a malformed wolf. Others said like a mountain lion that walked wrong, upright for moments at a time. He said no bodies were ever found, but sometimes they discovered shredded campsites or prints too big to match any known species. I left that same day. I didn't even look back at the forest. It's been years, but I still dream of that valley, of the way the air changed right before the howling began, of the eyes that didn't blink. Every time I close my eyes in a quiet place, I remember that feeling of being watched by something that didn't belong in this world. And sometimes, on winter nights, when the wind howls across the mountains behind my home, I swear it sounds exactly like what I heard that night in Elk Valley. Only this time, it's closer.